Hello, everyone. This is Sherry Welsh. In this episode of the Sherry Welsh Coaching Podcast, I'm excited to present a webinar conversation that I recorded with my coach, Steve Chandler, and it's about expectations versus agreements. If you don't know Steve's work, you can find out more at stevechandler.com. Many times when we're frustrated, whether it's with a colleague, a boss, a spouse, or a child, the underlying issue is that we're operating based on assumptions and expectations of what people should be doing rather than on co-creating clear agreements with each other. I first learned about this life-changing distinction by working with Steve. I worked with him for over a year as his apprentice, and I really practiced how to co-create strong agreements with others. And I hope you'll enjoy listening and learning more about how you can turn your frustrations into strong co-created agreements.
Hello everyone, this is Maurice Bassett, and I'm here today with Steve Chandler and Sherry Welsh, and I'd like to welcome you to our call today. Steve and Sherry are going to be in conversation on expectation versus agreement and using expectation versus agreement with our clients. So welcome Steve and welcome Sherry.
Hi Maurice, thanks very much for putting this together, and hello Sherry. I'll introduce you in a second. And
Okay.
I personally have found that expectations versus agreements is a distinction that when you really get it and know how to use it, really helps with clients. It really helps even in talking to prospects to get them started. I talked to a prospect on the West Coast recently who wanted me to come in and work with his leadership team. And I sent him the audio and told him that this would be the heart of what I'd be working on. And if he could share that with the team and if they were in alignment, I would come out. And they got really excited when they heard it. And it isn't because it's such a great audio. It was really improvisational, and I sort of stumbled through explaining it. But the idea itself is exciting and useful. And I wanted to talk to Sherry because I know that Sherry has talked to a lot of us in ACS about how she works with organizations and leaders and people in leadership with this idea, and how she brings it into clients. And I think it's so useful to all of us to understand this. I would hate to have ACS people go through ACS and then miss this and not quite get it and not quite get the power of this. So Sherry, thanks so much for coming on board and agreeing to talk to me about this.
Absolutely. Thanks for having the conversation with me, Steve.
Well, you're welcome. Now, I know it's my experience that I can do a half day or a whole day on expectations versus agreements, and how usually in organizations, even in families and marriages, people have expectations of the other person. And so they're constantly getting disappointed and upset, and then they have complaints about other people, and but they don't have agreements, and they don't see that they can replace their expectations with agreements. And there's a kind of a step-by-step process. It's very simple to do that. And tell me a little bit about your experience going into organizations, teaching them this distinction.
Yeah, definitely. I've had similar experience where I've spent, I can do it in a little bit of 2 hours or half day or even multi-day sessions. And what I do with clients is start in the first engagement with them, the first session with them. I send them the audio, expectation versus agreements. I give them a little bit of background and let them know that you've made it and what's behind it and what I've learned from it, from my own experience of using co-created agreements with my son, with my ex-husband, with my clients, with everyone in my world. And so I ask them to listen to it, and then we spend the session starting with the step-by-step process, as you said, and it starts with making a request. And so we talk about what complaints do you have, what frustrations do you have of others, what is happening in your current situation that is causing you to not be as productive as you'd like to be, who's involved in having that happen. So you want the client and the individuals in the room to get a sense of, okay, who's to blame, right? That it's always somebody else that's to blame for why I can't get done what I want to get done. And so that's where the frustration comes and the complaint originates.
Well, and I love what you just kind of brushed over it, but the identifying complaints is a great place to start. And complaints that people have, and this works really well. I use it with clients who are having a hard time in their relationship with their significant other, and they have complaints. And so I like to simply ask, okay, what's your request? Do you have a request for that person? And and then they stop and think about it, and then a request can be made, and the other person can agree to honor that request, and now they have an agreement. And that changes everything, because living a life of expectations, and this is something I point out to clients at the start when I do this with groups or individuals, a life of expectations of other people, walking around expecting other people to behave a certain way, expecting them to want something, is I'm either going to be disappointed or else I'm going to feel nothing. So either if they don't live up to my expectation, I'm disappointed.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm even betrayed.
Right.
And so that's one thing that can happen. If they do live up to my expectation, then I feel nothing because I expected it. So it's an entire life of going from nothing to disappointment, back to nothing, back to disappointment. Mm-hmm. And there are people who that's what their relationships are like in organizations and in families. They're disappointed in people all the time. They're upset with people, and
exactly.
It doesn't have to be that way.
Exactly. So, yeah.
Yeah, and when they see the power in creating agreements, it's amazing. Go ahead, I'm cutting you off.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add that in organizations specifically, what I've found is that, and I was a part of that for many years when I was in the companies I was, employed in for many years. And what I find is that there's the expectation, like you said, that the person's supposed to know what their job is. And so when they do their job, it's like, well, yeah, that's what their job is. Of course, they should do that. And there's no excitement, there's no enthusiasm, there's no camaraderie whatsoever. It's a life of, well, so what? That's what, that's their job. And when there's disappointment, there's frustration because the person's not doing what they want them to do or what they expect them to do. Well, they're not doing their job, and they should know what their job is. It's not my job to tell them what their job is. And that's where it swirls and it stews with people. And what I found when I help clients see this in the very beginning, and we just continue to reinforce it and work with it and bring it into every session, and I listen for, okay, where's the expectation and what's going on in this scenario? And when we talk about shifting a complaint to a request, what clients get concerned about when I start with them is, well, it's going to take forever to make all these agreements. This is ridiculous. I don't have time to make all these agreements with everyone. And so I get on the front end of that, and I say, look, it takes 10 seconds in this conversation to make a request, and that's where it starts. And just because you make a request doesn't mean you have an agreement. So you want to co-create it. That's the key word that you taught me, Steve, is in the creation of agreements, it's co-created. So you start with a request, but the other person may not agree to that initially, and that's okay. And then you say, well, what are you willing to do if it's not this request that I've made? And then they offer something, and you can then go back and forth a total of 20 seconds, maybe 30, but it's not a long time that gets involved. And so I really help clients see that it's not a time-consuming activity or skill. It's a way of being and a way of life that you can make very natural.
Yeah, and it's nothing compared to the time it takes to go around and repair the upset that was done with people not living up to your expectation, and you expected a report to be done by a certain time and it wasn't done, and there are consequences. And now, how do I confront the person, and how do I apologize to the other person? And that's what takes time.
Exactly.
Not having agreements takes so much time. It's true in a marriage as well. You can expect things for even years in a marriage or a relationship, and the other person expects a certain attitude and behavior, and you expect something, and it just messes everything up because there's no real agreement. We haven't sat down and talked it through.
Yeah, exactly. And with the current technology in our society and email as a mechanism of communication, which you know, you and I can probably agree that a lot of people hide behind emails. I know I've seen it, where it's just easier to just send a quick email. Well, this is what I need you to do. And there's no creating an agreement there. It's just, I'm going to tell you what you should do. And because email is so rampantly used in organizations, it's even more time wasted when there's just expectation back and forth on email. They're not even talking to each other.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's the part where, you know, when I can work with the clients in companies, we start with that request. Start with complaints versus request exercise that gets them at least formulating in words out of their mouth a request instead of it being just email back and forth, ping pong.
So what do you do when someone raises their hand and says, okay, this sounds great, Sherry, but what about people who keep breaking their agreements? Yeah,
it's a great question because that happens all the time, actually. So the client says, well, you know, I had a great agreement, and you know, they don't honor it, they don't keep it. I said, well, okay, let's look at that. And so I do game film, which is something you taught me to do with clients, is really slow it down and say, okay, so what was the request you made of them? And they'll tell me, and I said, okay, and what was the response of that person when you made that request? And that's usually where they hesitate. Well, they said they would do it. I said, okay, well, that sounds pretty open-ended. That sounds pretty vague. Like, what exactly are they going to do? Did they specify that they were going to do exactly what you requested, or what it was going to look like, or when it was going to be given to you? And when I asked those questions of whether they really created a strong agreement and that it had really specifics identified so the other person knows what they're signing up for, what they're agreeing to, my client typically sees that, okay, I can make it stronger next time. That I let it hang open a little bit. I let it be a little loose. So I bring it back to the ownership of that person, which is the client in this case, saying, you know, well, they don't honor, the other person is the one that doesn't honor the agreement. And I say, well, you know, let's bring it back to how you can create a stronger one, because that's what I've seen. I continue to learn that myself.
Yeah, and a lot of times, if they just use the word agreement and say, you know, they tell somebody what to do, they tell them their expectation, and then they say, so are we in agreement? And the other one says, yeah, sure.
Exactly.
And that's not a real agreement.
Yeah.
That hasn't been co-authored. And like you say, it's not a strong agreement. It's not even a real agreement. I just used the word agreement.
Exactly.
But another thing I like to invite clients to do is check out the strength of your agreement before you leave the conversation. So somebody says, I'd like that by Friday. Is that okay with you? And they say, yeah, sure. Now, is that something I can count on? would you like another day? Well, no, I'm going to try. I'm pretty sure I can get it to you Friday. Well, no, then that's not an agreement. That's something you're going to try to do. And I get that. And I count on it by Monday. Well, yeah, Monday for sure. So that's something I can count on. Yeah, so that's the agreement, is you're telling me what I can count on. So it becomes a promise from your side. Also, to strengthen the agreement, I like to invite people to say, now what can I do to help you make this happen? What do you need from me to make sure that we get this done by Monday? And a lot of times the other person will say, well, now that you asked, I could use this or I could use that, or it would help if I got that. And then now both people can participate in a co-authored agreement. And a lot of times when I would do it with groups, people would raise their hand and say, what about a person who keeps breaking agreements? Well, this is even when they're being introduced to it, I know that those weren't agreements. Or I know that they're imagining in the future somebody who they have had a hard time trusting.
Yeah.
That even if they make an agreement, that person isn't going to keep it.
Right.
So, so I'll say one more thing that I want to ask you something. But one thing I like, if somebody comes back to me after they're doing this and they say, oh, I made an agreement and the person broke it, I like to say, well, now you have an opportunity to have a conversation about agreements and get an agreement that we're going to keep our agreements with each other. In other words, you want to bring it down to the fundamental relationship between the two people. That when you promise something, I take you at your word. When I promise something, you take me at my word. And we are going to agree to keep our agreements with each other. Because if you don't have that, you don't have a relationship. If somebody's word no longer means anything, you don't even have human communication going on if the words don't mean anything.
Yeah,
and a lot of times people think they can't ask that of another person. They can't ask a person to keep their promises. But it's just so fundamental. And when both people are participating, it's actually liberating for both people because you have a way that you've agreed to operate with each other. And you can run a whole company culture or a marriage or even children who are old enough to understand what agreements are, they understand it. And
Yeah, I agree, Steve. And I'd like to add something as you talked about, is that something I can count on or is that just something you're going to try to do? Another thing I tell clients that they can practice and use is to ask the person after they've co-created an agreement to test its strengths, is to say, so what might get in the way of this working, of this agreement working, or this deadline being met that you just agreed to?
Good.
Because people tend to forget, well, you know what, the person that I need the information from might not give it to me on time. Okay, so what can you do to talk to them and get an agreement with them that they're going to give you what you need on time to get me what I have requested? So we'll walk through it, a couple scenarios to flush out any potential excuses that may come up, right?
Right.
Yeah, so they can see that life does get in the way sometimes, and there's ways they can handle that and prepare for that and manage it as it occurs. And the other thing that comes up many times in organizations is the hierarchy. So as you said, when you say people use the word, okay, so this is what I want you to do. We have an agreement, right, that you'll do that. A lot of times that's the boss saying that to a direct report. And the direct report says, well, I can't ask my boss for an agreement. I can't say no to my boss. And I said, well, that's something to consider. You both are human beings, and you both have a job to do. And so your boss is asking for something. And it's up to you to be true to your word, to say, yes, I can do it, or no, I cannot. And if you can't, what do you want to ask your boss for to help? Just like you said, the support. What can they do to help you get to the point of creating a strong agreement? And that's been something that definitely shows up is the hierarchy and the belief that, this person is higher ranking than I am, so I just have to agree.
Yes.
So we spend a lot of time on that.
Yeah, that's a good thing. And you can make a request of your boss if you do it respectfully.
Exactly.
And you want something to occur, or you want something, you can make a request, and you can say, ma'am, sir, I have a request I'd like to make. And yes, tell me what it is. And then you can create an agreement up the ladder as well as down the ladder. And
exactly.
They don't have to accept. They don't have to agree.
Mm-hmm.
There are other things too. Like I don't have to. It is so much. There's so much more integrity with not just saying yes to something, even though I know I'm not going to be able to do it. A lot of people in organizations do that.
Exactly.
So their boss will ask them to do 5 things by the end of the day tomorrow. They know they're not going to be able to do all 5, so they walk away saying, okay, and then they're resentful, they're fuming, and then they only get 2 or 3 of them done, and then they hope they're not yelled at. Well, they can have the integrity in the spirit of agreements is, I'm really flattered that you think I can do all 5 of these. If time only permits me to, and I'm going to give it my best shot, if time only permits me to get 3 of these done or 2 of these done, what's your priority? What is the most important here for you? And that's being open up front, so that, because a lot of times bosses have no clue. They don't know that this is not going to be easy to do. They don't know that. And if you're not going to be open and be willing to talk person to person with somebody that way, in a very courteous way, with service on your mind, things get worse down the road, not better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're totally right. And that's what it comes down to is, respectfully and appropriately letting your boss know what's going on, and that, you're having these priorities, and it's a matter of what would you like me to hold off on as this seems to be more urgent, or maybe not, right? And maybe then the boss says, oh, okay, wait a minute, no, take care of those other things first, and then, get to this when you can. When will you be able to get to it? So, and it's a matter of having that relationship where you're in communication, you're talking to each other, you're opening up and saying, look, this is what I'm willing to do, and this is what I know I can do and commit to, not just try to do it. And it changes everything for both parties. And then the boss is better at co-creating strong agreements with others as when he learns from you or she learns from you how to do it.
I agree. And once companies and organizations and individuals warm up to this, they really see the value of it, and they become total converts. They get so excited by it. It changes the whole culture. It changes the way they communicate with people.
It does.
Has that been your experience too?
Absolutely, yeah. It's so exciting when you hear them saying it, right? Well, wait a minute, that's not a clear agreement, or no, that's not what we agreed to. Okay, it's a great opportunity to talk about what got in the way and what can we agree to now going forward. And they really do get excited about it. At first, when they hear the audio and they're, you begin, it doesn't take root immediately, and that's okay. They all, from the concept and the idea, they get it immediately, right? The information they get, it makes sense. Okay, but then it does take the practice, and it does take the time coaching together and working together, working through scenarios, live scenarios that they're faced with day in and day out. And as you said, I bring in many times the spouse and the kids co-creating strong agreements with their family members. And I use examples of myself with my son, Jonathan. You know, I had one I shared with Leslie San last winter when, you know, I came home and the driveway wasn't shoveled, and I just expected that he would have done that, and I was so mad, and I'm, you know, shoveling at 10 o'clock at night to get my car in the driveway. And I actually had a meeting early with you the next morning, and I didn't want to be late for it. So it was very important that I got this taken care of. And I'm muttering under my breath and cursing under my breath, you know, poor Jonathan. And so I realized after 20 minutes of this, oh, my God, I've never created an agreement with him. Of course, you know, he doesn't know that I expect this. I've never asked him and requested him to do this. So I came in and sent a note to them. He was at his dad's, and, you know, immediately I got a response back. Absolutely, Mama. Of course I'll do that next time you're out of town. And it was beautiful. He you know, 15 years old, and he absolutely understood what it was, you know, and that it made sense. That you know, I'll be happy to do that for you. And he would, and he did from that point on. So so I use those examples that are really true, and so people in the organizations, when they hear that, they're like, oh my God, yeah, this can work everywhere. And I'm like, it does.
Yeah. And it can be even the smallest thing in a relationship, like the use of the toilet, putting the seat up, putting the seat down.
Exactly.
A request. I remember that there was a request made of me that I please turn the light on when I use the restroom at night, because there are consequences when I don't. And so instead of
perfect,
you know, instead of just being angry and you're thoughtless and any fool would know, and I can't believe you think so little of me, and things like that. People tend to personalize things and judge other people and roll their eyes and get sarcastic. Instead, in agreements replaces all of that.
Yeah.
And that's the beautiful part of it. A lot of times it really restores relationships in a real reasonable, rational way.
It does.
Versus,
it does.
You know, you always see. I've seen these. I've had clients who go to marriage counseling. The two poor people are sitting there, just absolutely venting and dumping on each other, and long lists of here's what I don't appreciate about him, and then the other person says, here's what I really don't appreciate about her, and all these long lists, and then the other person is surprised, like, really? And you never asked. Oh, and then the other person says, oh, I should ask, right? Why should I ask? Why should I have to ask? Any reasonable person would have known that that's what I wanted, but we don't know.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the same in organizations, right? That there's all these vague, unspoken expectations going on. And the way global companies are today, there's, you know, the Europeans that have expectations of the Americans, and the Americans of the Japanese and the Chinese, and they're all on the same team. They're all working for the same company, and it's really unfortunate how much waste is in the system, and how much frustration builds with those unspoken expectations that are going on. And I'm with you. That's the biggest part that I've seen too, is that if you just get it out on the table, and that's where request versus complaints exercise really helps to get things at least out in the open, so you can start working with them instead of them staying in their heads.
Right. Yeah. Well, this is good. Do you have any other thoughts, anything that you've talked to other ACS members about teaching people this?
I think this helped to talk through it a bit more, and it's really in as we work as coaches with clients and helping clients to see this, and then living it ourselves. it's become such a valuable tool, Steve, that you've created this audio. I mean, I share it with everyone, and you're so, generous to share it openly with everyone, because it does change the relationships all the way through an organization, a team, and it has people happier in their work and the jobs, that they're a part of, because it's more enjoyable to be working with people that respect each other and get along and understand what the agreements are, and even the people outside the organization benefit. So customers, agreements with customers and with suppliers, and all the way through. It's really powerful. So it can be used anywhere, in any type of industry, any type of company, any type of relationship, personal, professional. So I thank you for creating it in the first place, because it's absolutely changed my life, and I know it's impacted the clients that I've worked with in companies up to this point. So I look forward to continue it for many years.
Well, and what I admire about you is when you learn something like this, you march right in and teach other people this, and then they hire you to come back and teach more of the people in the company this. And it also applies, anyone in the ACS listening to this, it applies to any client, any prospective client you have is going to have a complaint about another human being.
Exactly.
You're not going to find people out there who are not, and it often comes up in your first enrollment conversation that someone has a complaint about somebody else, a boss or a family member, or they just have a complaint, and the complaint shows up. And we as coaches can use that moment to start people on the right track and have a whole new life. And the other thing I love about agreements is it's an artistic thing. It's a beautiful thing to co-create an agreement where both people are participating, like a co-written song. It doesn't lock people down, but there is accountability in it too. That's another great thing. It's not just some vague good feeling like we like each other now. There's real strong accountability in agreements, and there is no accountability in leading by expectation or relating to your spouse through expectations you have for your spouse. There's no collaboration or teamwork in expectation. It is a setup for judging another person.
Agree.
And we don't have to have that going on.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love it.
All right. This is good. So, Maurice, thank you for giving us this opportunity to create a conversation for our people in the ACS.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Wonderful. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Sherry.